Thank you very much, Jen. Buen día, no, para nosotros, buenas tardes para ustedes, good afternoon, bom dia, boa tarde. We will make some kind of introduction about nuclear security and prevention of nuclear terrorism with our focus on nuclear risks. And we will develop here a specific case about the detonation of an improvised nuclear device, a crude nuclear bomb. I will share with you my screen. Okay, this the prevention of nuclear terrorism is a topic of high relevance. The importance of the topic has been related to an international effort, a continuous international effort through time, and maybe some icons of that effort has been the nuclear security summits that congregated almost 50 chiefs of states around the world of the most relevant nuclear countries around the world. So this presentation, we will focus, as you say, on what is prevention of nuclear terrorism, showing you that the effect that could be related to a specific case, a detonation of an improvised nuclear device, but also we will start with a kind of analysis of what nuclear risks are. First of all, I wanted to put here the definition of the IAEA about nuclear security, that is just the prevention and detection and response to several kind of actions, have sabotage, unauthorized access, illegal transfer, and other malicious acts involving nuclear material, other radioactive substance, and their associated facilities. As I told you last day about a glossary, IAEA's glossary about safeguards, we have also in IAEA a nuclear security glossary, and you have all the terms there that could be useful for you to understand the problematic. But we should also take into account that the IAEA is focused on nuclear risks related to peaceful uses, and the field of nuclear risk is much more wider. For example, we in the past and in the present, we develop a more holistic approach about nuclear risk, involving not only peaceful uses, but also non-peaceful uses or military uses that, of course, are sources of nuclear risk. In this point, I want to tell you that the phrase nuclear risk has two interpretations depending on the environment. When you talk of nuclear risks on the environment of the NPT and NPT REPCONs, it is more focused on the nuclear risk related to the use of nuclear weapons. When you talk about nuclear risk reduction, you are talking in the environment of the NPT about how to reduce the probability of use of nuclear weapons. But here in this holistic approach, we are looking to all the nuclear risks. Of course, nuclear weapons are a big source of nuclear risk, not only because of detonation, but also because different kinds of problems, accidents, misuse, etc. Today we have 13,000 nuclear weapons owned by 9 states, and 3,700 deployed. You have here a chart with the possessors. We are not going to go in deep with this. Besides nuclear weapons, the risk of use, detonations, or theft of a nuclear warhead, We have the risk related to nuclear materials and facilities. There is a very important document that you can browse and consult and take. That is the Nuclear Security Index produced by the NTI. I'm the pleasure be of the advisory group for the index, and they account on all the places, the states, and the situation, the status of the state that have nuclear materials and facilities. Nowadays, we have nuclear materials and facilities in 47 states. And in particular, nuclear weapons usable materials, more precisely HU, high enrichment uranium and plutonium, are still in 22 states. There is a risk of theft of these materials in the facilities or during the transportations. This theft could be done by terrorists or criminal organizations that further sell the materials to terrorists. There are another important risk that should be considered is the theft of radioactive sources that are, as you know, globally distributed in every country and could be stolen and then sold to terrorists. Then you have the terrorist acts themselves. The terrorist acts could be intrusions to facility, sabotage, attacks of several ways, including more recently cyber attacks and drone attacks. The other phase of terrorism is the building and the detonation of improvised nuclear device, a low-yield nuclear bomb, a crude nuclear bomb is another way to mention it. And of course, the radiological dispersal device, or the bomb, says that it consists in radioactive sources and conventional explosives. All these is an approach that could we say comprehensive or holistic about nuclear risks. In terms of Latin America is a region free of nuclear weapons, of course, from the Tlatelolco Treaty, but it's also nowadays free of nuclear weapons usable materials. We have in the region enrichment technology in Brazil and Argentina. We have nuclear facilities very relevant in several countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Mexico, etc. And we have radiological sources all over the region. If we talk that a nuclear risk is a potential attack to facility, we have vulnerable situations concerning our facilities and radiological sources. But we should consider as important as the nuclear-related components of the risk, what we call in the NTI index, the risk environment for nuclear terrorism and organized crime. For example, states with political instability, ineffective governance, corruption, weak judiciary systems, impunity, totalitarian governments, states controlled by the organized crime, totally or partially, and of course states that they have deliberate relations with transnational terrorism. All these non-nuclear components of the risk could be what we call the risk environment, could be boosters of any terrorist attack anywhere in the world, converting the region in an intermediate point for illicit trade, or even in a terrorist haven. We have the triple border here, Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, that is a very hot point, and several others in the region. So, how plausible is a nuclear terrorist attack? We will go to the extreme case, that is as an example. But now we will think a little bit about the plausibility, feasibility of a nuclear terrorist attack. So far, in this century, we have many terrorist acts, but mostly they have been conventional attacks with knives, guns, trucks, bombs. But the terrorist group, I mentioned the Islamic group, but there are other non-Islamic groups that could be involved in the wish of acquiring and use weapons of mass destruction. I put here, then I provide the presentation for you, some figures about what have been the terrorist attacks worldwide in a certain period in the Western countries and even in Europe. But we shouldn't forget that previously of that, we have in Argentina 2 major attacks, the Israeli embassy and the AMIA, Jewish Mutual Association, with a death toll of 114 deaths. So the region has experienced a major terrorist attack. That is my message. Well, but what if these conventional attacks that are low-cost attacks escalates to a nuclear detonation? That is the analysis. Nuclear detonation with an improvised nuclear device, for example, of 1 kiloton, is a low probability event with a huge potential damage. Therefore, in terms of prevention, should be analyzed as a high-risk event. The path to nuclear terrorism. How could we pass from the low-cost attacks to any major event of like weapons of mass destruction event? We have a simple cell or lonely wolf for the street attacks with conventional means, but it requires a network for it. All this has been very studied by intelligence and even by different think tanks around the world. Even we have studied that at MPS Global, and we think that it's not enough a simple cell to perform a chemical attack or a dirty bomb of an attack to a facility, but it should be require a simple network. And many analysts envision this kind of attack as an intermediate or the next steps from what we have nowadays. And then for a bio attack, for a crude fission bomb, we will need a sophisticated network, a very, very sophisticated network involving many actors. The future evolution depends on the change of mindset of current terrorist group. Terrorist group today, or in the recent past, has been groups of not very much sophistication on their mindset. So they had preferred the low cost and impressive attack involving a small number of victims. Then the level of support funding, because a major attack wouldn't be cheap. And of course, and this is the important part that should involve us, the international and national practical barriers to prevent and counter this kind of malicious acts. Not only by terrorists, but the related organized crime that could be the starting point. It involves reducing vulnerabilities and neutralizing the threat through legal framework. And effective application is not enough to have a legal framework in place, but the application is the important thing. And of course, the intelligence, the coordination of intelligence around the world, working in cooperation to neutralize the threat. So I will go very quick through this presentation about nuclear terrorist detonation and its effects. We we have been with MPS Global and the Latin American Leadership Network very successful with this presentation. We gave this around the world about 20 times in all the continents practically. In the time close to the last nuclear security summits, and we go on with this, but because this is totally timely to share with you this. The quick question was if terrorists detonate a small gill fission bomb in a capital city. What would be the less obvious but decisive impacts, not the impact, the physical impacts in the target state or the target city? In what stage should that to change the present and future dynamic of the war, and in what aspects? What would be the most appropriate measures to reduce the risk of occurrence, of course, and how to minimize the impact? And how, this is the important part, how governments, international organizations, and NGOs should positive act to reduce risk associated to nuclear terrorism. That involves every one of us. This has been put in a document that I will share with you the link, that is called Terror Unleashed. It is in Spanish and in English. Well, the idea is you have studied here, I suppose, the way that, or the architecture of a very simple gun type artifact, nuclear weapons. That is like you see there in the graph. And the key features of this is a simple gun type would be for terrorists in an HU fission bomb, that it requires 50 kilograms of HU at the 9% of enrichment, that is weapon grades, and it represents 25 centimeter sphere of diameter. How the material could be obtained, stealing it in small amounts from poorly protected facilities around the world. The material, this involved people insiders, people inside the facilities, or organized crime, or the same terrorists. But in the case, could be purchased by terrorists in the black market, shipped to a haven through weak borders that could be some of the countries in Latin America. And the construction, the building of the IND is very simple and could be made by a good medium-level engineers anywhere in the world. So, as you can see, there are several steps that involve countries possessing fissile materials, but several steps involved in any country. So it's not excuse to say my country has no fissile material to be exempt of participation in a major terrorist attack around the world. Well, here I will leave you the consequence of such attack of 1 kiloton in the ground zero of a big capital city. It would be done hypothetically in a state that could be cause as much as damage as possible. It would be a developed node of human activity in Europe, in the States, etc. We studied here the indirect effects of this, because for our countries that we don't have the materials, we should be how could this affect to our countries, in Latin America and the Caribbean, for example. We studied 4 dimensions globally for developed countries and for countries of medium development as ours in Latin America. For example, in terms of security and defense, we found out that a nuclear terrorist attack would increase the global distress and consequence the tensions among countries, and could even be a potential trigger of a nuclear interchange between states. That it would be the worst of the scenario, depending on the level of support of perpetrators. If, for example, if a state is identified by the intelligence as supporting the perpetrators in another state, that could be considered an adversary to them. In terms of economy and finance, we studied and put figures, and it's very interesting what we found out. At any case, a global terrorist, a terrorist attack in a big capital city could bring a severe economic depression of many years. Very similar at what we have now with COVID. We conservatively calculate to minus 2% of a fall of growth in global GDP. We have had in 2020 minus 3.5% due to COVID-19. So we would be in a global economic crisis like we are experiencing today with COVID. The fall of international trade, the increase of global poverty derived of all this international environment, the global shortage of high-tech products, including medicine for our Latin American countries and other mid-developed and low development. What we are seeing now in certain measure with the COVID vaccines, and a severe reduction of humanitarian aid to less developed countries, because states would see to save themselves or to protect themselves and not to aid or to help other states. I leave here a graph that could be interesting with this calculation of us, and would be a very dramatic scenario in terms of economy. Then you have very strong impacts in international relations, because I think we think that the international system will be shocked with something like that, because in this term, even more than with COVID, because it would represent a very strong failure of international tools of prevention in terms of agreements, initiatives, etc. Of course, it could be a deep crisis of the current nuclear order, and a strong endorsement of national security measures against terrorism that could be many psychosocial impacts, and even at government and society terms. Of course, there would be a global panic, fear, uncertainty, because terrorists wouldn't say, well, specifically we did that and that's all, but they could be threatened another state with some similar attack. And the international and national governance would be threatened at all levels, no doubt. And there will be in many countries, as we are experiencing in many countries now, severe restriction of individual freedoms and human rights. And it is happening with COVID right now. So the conclusions of all these thoughts that we pour through many years of work is that no country in possession, either of nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons usable material can guarantee their full protection against nuclear terrorism or any other way of organized crime. Nor it is realistic to conceive a full compensation. For example, the COVID started in Wuhan in China, but China wouldn't be able at any rate to compensate the damage at international level. The same would happen with a nuclear terrorism attack. And the evidence also shows that countries that do not possess, that is my main message here, nuclear weapons, usable materials, or nuclear facilities, can also be functional by act or by omission to a nuclear terrorist attack anywhere in the world. Because of all that risk environment features or characteristic of several several states, even many in Latin America. This means that all the states should be alert and work in prevention and countering of nuclear terrorism. Even it could be seen as a low probability act. The definition we know. This is just at a glance the current nuclear security architecture. There is a constellation of international legal instruments. You have a lot of instruments here, but only 3 of them are binding, the other are voluntary. The CPPNM amended, that is the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and now with the amendment facilities that will be reviewed next year. The ICSAN, the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, and the resolution of the UN Security Council, the 5040, that Edith will be referred this. I won't talk about the nuclear, the international legal instruments about nuclear security, just to give you a picture at a glance. And of course, the Nuclear Security Summit, the action of IAEA, the Nuclear Security Contact Group, and the NGOs that could be, or networks of NGOs that could be working on that. There has been very well defined the functionalities of robust global nuclear security system. Should define a set of, we work a lot of this on these points in different groups through the times. Elena has been part of these groups. Defines a set of minimum nuclear security standards, supports universal implementation of binding instruments, seeks for full protection of weapons usable material and facility sensors, civilian and non-civilian, encourage transparency and share best practices, promotes minimization of further elimination of HU and separate plutoniums, civilian and non-civilian, and provides adequate response to the future evolution of nuclear threats. For example, cyber terrorism is a new nuclear threat. To make it possible, this is a my message for government that think that something that nuclear terrorism or attack or the further effects could affect them. As you can see with the figures, it affects the global community, every one of the countries. And it's important that there should be awareness in government about this global dimension of the threat, and understand the concrete ways in which nuclear terrorism could affect national interests. States shouldn't do things because other states impose them things, but because of their own national interest. And the country should not only adhere, but implement a set of national measures with adequate support of actors in the international community. And of course, should bind themselves to a minimum acceptable agreed security rules, even though nuclear security is part of the sovereign rights of any state. Nobody can oblige a state to do or to make nuclear security or in any or other way. It is voluntary because it's a sovereign right so far of each state. To finish the challenges opportunity for Latin America, keep the issue high in the governmental agenda. That is important, and you are multiplicators as diplomats of all this in your countries. That is very important, your role. Integrate the region under common risk reduction goals in comprehensive terms, as I told you at the very beginning. To promote the full adherence to the binding instruments. In particular, we have the CPPNM amended REVCOM next year. Should be Latin America should have a key participation, should be active on this. Improve, of course, the risk environment in the region with focus on non-nuclear weaknesses that has been analyzed here in this presentation, and promote also the full integration of nuclear security to the NPT REVCOM process, hopefully for the next year. And of course, increase the participation in regional and international efforts to reduce nuclear security risks. So I leave you some bibliography. There is a lot. Well, and with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much. And then we will open to questions and comments.
First of all, want to say thank you for the invitation and say hi to all the participants in the course. I know you're kind of on the last stretch here, and it's not an easy subject in terms of nuclear security and terrorism. I also want to say thank you to Irma for really framing the issue so well, and it's easy to jump off her presentation and highlight some points that I would like to add. And I would start with the following. The concern over the security of nuclear materials and facilities obviously is something that is very high on the agenda when we speak about terrorism, particularly nuclear terrorism. But with all the measures that need to be put in place are also working towards safe, secure use of the peaceful nuclear technologies, nuclear materials, radioactive materials. There have been many cases where various radiological incidents happen because just of criminal intent or by accident, by negligence. And one of the well-known cases actually did happen in your region. In 1987 in Goiânia, Brazil, a radioactive source, highly potent radioactive source from a teletherapy machine, which the teletherapy machine was in a hospital, but they moved the hospital to a new building and left the teletherapy machine behind. So the radioactive source from that machine was actually taken by somebody just by accident. It ended up first in the scrapyard, and then people brought it home, looked at the fancy device, saw some interesting glowing powder in it, silverish powder. And in the end, 4 people died. There were more than several people with radiation burns. Many thousands of people were treated and inspected in the hospital. There was a huge impact, economic impact, social impact on the area. We actually had at the Vienna Center one of the diplomats from Guyana, and he was sharing with us stories about even the ostracism that the residents from the area were experiencing. They were treated like outcasts to a certain degree for a long time. So what I wanted to highlight here is that nuclear security is important for many reasons. Of course, one of the biggest concerns is nuclear terrorism or radiological terrorism. What I will focus today is on the regime itself. I know you have already had lectures on nuclear safeguards, and a lot was covered on non-proliferation issues in general. Nuclear security is different, as Irma has said it. We speak about the materials, nuclear materials, the facilities, either for weapons purposes or for, we talk about the attack on facilities or use of radioactive materials for dirty burn or some other possibilities. But the regime related to nuclear security had a different development than nuclear non-proliferation. With the treaty, with the NPT, we have a formal regime, we have an organization, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that implements safeguards, that looks at the how the states keep their nuclear materials so that it's not diverted towards military programs. Nuclear security in this respect is not regulated in the NPT treaty, and we don't have the International Atomic Energy Agency coming and inspecting countries. As Irma clearly stated, it's the sovereign right of each state to implement nuclear security. So just from that standpoint, responsibility for nuclear security lies within the state. And so that period. However, as was already clearly demonstrated, we do need to have some common standards and methodology when we implement the security. We also deal with non-state actors that do not particularly care about international borders, or the material is in transport and they're vulnerable. We also want to make sure that if our country does a very good job in protecting its materials, its facilities, we also want to make sure that other countries do the same. Because there is only kind of, you find a weakest link and then there would be serious consequences. So with that, nuclear regime did not develop like overnight. Some of the first initial concerns about terrorism at the international level were associated with the rise of terrorism in Europe and North America. There were plenty of assassinations, kidnapping, aircraft hijacking in the 1970s and 80s. One of the most kind of known cases is the massacre of involving Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympic Games in 1972. It was also considered at the UN at that point. That was the trigger for first kind of international instruments and development of rules and standards in nuclear security. The second trigger was the nuclear materials trafficking or smuggling of nuclear materials following the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, where all the controls were broken down. Instead of one state, you have 15 states with no borders, with no regulations, without personnel and everything. And of course, the biggest catalyst to the nuclear security regime was the attack on the US of 9/11 in 2001. So the 70s and 80s, what we saw is actually the development of the first rules and guidance on how to protect nuclear materials, like physically protect them. The convention that Irma mentioned on physical protection of nuclear materials was also developed and signed in 1980. In the 90s, with that increased trafficking in nuclear materials, particularly if you imagine Soviet Union and Russia now with not only nuclear weapons, but hundreds of nuclear facilities. It's the largest arsenal of and stocks of highly enriched uranium, plutonium, and everything in between. So the IAEA started to play a really big role during that period. First of all, before that time, there was not even a division or office in the International Atomic Energy Agency specifically focused on nuclear security. They started tracking various smuggling cases in the world. The International Atomic Energy started to offer countries various advisory services and missions to help them build their nuclear security. The further development of different recommendations and standards. And at the international level, at that time, there were plenty of programs to help the Soviet Union to beef up its security, physical protection, accounting for materials, and many other programs. Of course, the biggest concern is, as Irma mentioned, is about materials that could be used for making a nuclear device, highly enriched plutonium and highly enriched uranium and plutonium. Luckily for all of us, there are not that many cases that are known. And if you look at the graph, you will see that the majority of these cases happened in the mid-90s, early 90s, exactly associated with the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the amounts were pretty significant, several kilograms of material that's quite usable for weapons purposes. Then the situation became better in terms of, but we still see occasionally cases of small amounts of these materials showing on black market, so to speak. But as I mentioned, the Soviet Union was the situation, and after the breakup of it was one of the triggers and catalysts, but it's a global program. There have been attacks everywhere in the world, from Asia to Africa to losses of materials in Latin America, and incidents with radioactive and nuclear materials as well. But it really in the 2000s when the regime really solidified. I'm not going to speak about the UN Security Council Resolution 1540. That's the Edith will speak about it, but it was the first instrument really focused on closing the gap in terms of treating who is responsible for non-state actors getting access to either weapons of mass destruction or their delivery systems. So that was a big gap that was filled with this resolution. But also many of the instruments that you saw on Irma's slide, or the architecture, also take their root in this period. And I'm not going to go through them. You will have my slides. Just want to highlight a couple of them. The Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and its convention, which was negotiated in 2005 and entered into force in 2016. The difference between the two is that the last amendment actually covers the protection of materials in domestic use, storage, and transport. And the first one only covered the transit of materials, the original convention. There is also expansion of its scope and the international cooperation. And also, as Irma noted, in 2012, it will be the first review conference of the amended convention, CPPNM. Those of you who might be involved in it, and if you would like to learn more, I'm sure you are welcome to get in touch with me or Irma. We would be happy to provide you with recommendations for resources. But for Vienna, where I work, it would be a very big issue next year for many governments. Irma mentioned the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. There is over a dozen, probably 17 different other conventions, and I'm skipping UN 1540 resolution on purpose. But there are a lot of voluntary instruments, as Irma mentioned, including some of the key of them are developed and kind of administered under the International Atomic Energy Agency kind of framework. It's the Code of Conduct on Safety and Security of Radioactive Materials, including the export and import and the management of the disused radioactive sources no longer in use. Like, for example, the case when I mentioned in Guyana. So it's no longer used, but it was left behind and created not real risk, which actually materialized. The IAEA itself plays a very central role, even though it doesn't have the mandate to inspect what countries do and how they organize their security. Nonetheless, it has a very important role, first, in the development of guidance, how to do it. And second, providing services that countries can request the International Atomic Energy to do. They can come and review how you organize it, from legislation to specifics of the Nuclear Security Organization and so forth. And also the International Atomic Energy provides important training and equipment to many countries. So for those who will be working in this area and diplomats serving in Vienna, very closely working with the agency on some of these issues. But there is more into the work of nuclear security. As Irma mentioned, there are other initiatives and even participation of non-governmental organizations, and many in them. One of the probably most important in this realm is a series of nuclear security summits that were organized at the initiative of the United States during President Obama administration. Originally, it was supposed to be one meeting, a summit of heads of state, but it turns into a series of 4 meetings, the last one in 2016. It has a large number of participating states, but not all of them, and major international organizations. And it was clear that the IAEA does have to it plays a central role in nuclear security, and the summits actually help to solidify its role in this area. What was also very clever in the organization of these summits is a so-called practice of house gifts. So countries that from each summit to another would implement some concrete measures, sign an international legal instrument, or convert facility from the use of highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium, or open a training center on nuclear security, and many others. So that was a really kind of big, high level and sustained attention to nuclear security that was done during that period. But there are still remaining challenges in the field. I would say we still have that tension between state sovereignty and responsibility for nuclear security and assuring others of adequate security. Because security in overall is something that countries, and it makes sense, do not like to disclose to others how they organize it. There is some logic to that, because information could be leaked and you kind of give it away to those who want to violate your security with terrorists or whatever, criminals. But there is a lot of information that could be shared, including like, how do you approach it? What kind of legislation you put in place? Demonstrating like joint exercises that could be done. And this is still, it's moving slowly, but it's now become much more commonplace where countries do invite for peer reviews or provide more information about how they implement nuclear security. There are a lot of new challenges. Everybody nowadays speaks about cyber information security, how somebody could penetrate the perimeter system and video cameras, and here you go, open a facility and then attack it. Drones are being used both for surveillance of territories of nuclear facilities, but they could also be used to deliver explosives and, I don't know, open the gate, so to speak, and many, many other things that I just don't want to go into. But one of the other remaining challenges is particularly with regard to the discussions within the NPT framework. There is a tension between the nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, where pushing nuclear security is seen as something that is coming more from the developed countries, particularly Western states. And at the same time, many non-nuclear weapon states, particularly those who don't even have nuclear facilities or materials on their territory, they say, we've been implementing all these nuclear security measures, but we don't see nuclear weapon states making progress in nuclear disarmament. So this kind of conflict between the two sometimes plays out both within the NPT, but mostly within the IAEA framework. And overall, the issue of access to nuclear energy and nuclear and radioactive material technologies is another area where kind of that tension with nuclear security often comes up. On one hand, we all, particularly those of us working in this field, know how much nuclear science and technology contributes to development and prosperity, from agriculture, health, like cancer diagnostic and treatment. In agriculture, seed irradiation for better crops, eradication of various diseases like malaria with insect sterilization and everything else. I'm not even speaking about nuclear power and energy. It's obviously clear on its own. But on the other hand, we have had this progressive kind of increase of nuclear security requirements. And at the same time, for many smaller countries, less developed countries, that means that they feel like they need to invest so much into the nuclear security area to get access to and make the nuclear technologies affordable. So inevitably, it leads to some of the tensions in this area, particularly if we speak about the distribution of funding, whether it goes towards technical cooperation on peaceful uses or nuclear security. And that is likely to be even more pronounced after the COVID-19 impact, because most likely funding coming from governments to support many international organizations is likely to be short. So that's something to keep in mind. But in the end, I think there is a clear realization by everyone, whether you come from nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states, from developed or developing countries, that in order to achieve sustainable development goals, particularly if we talk about global South, we need to use nuclear technologies and materials in safe, secure, and sustainable manner. And that means that we follow the guidance and recommendations that are developed and put serious efforts into robust domestic nuclear security and to promoting international cooperation in nuclear security. I'll stop here and I will pass the floor to the next speaker.
This is the content of my presentation. I'm going to talk about the UN Security Council Resolution 1540, its background, the definitions, obligations, and also I'm going to talk about the role of the committee, the tools for the implementation of the resolution, and also I will make a reference to the comprehensive review that's going on now, and the results that we got after analyzing the matrices, the 193 matrices of the all UN member states, and I'm going to finalize the conclusion with a summary. Irma and Elena has already talked about the resolution 1540 in some way, and other instruments that regulate in a way the nuclear security. But I have to say that the 1540 constitutes one of the mechanisms related to nuclear security, and it's much broader, the spectrum, compared, for example, with CPPNM, its amendment, and ICSAND. This resolution was unanimously adopted by the Security Council in 28 April 2004 by the members of the members by that time, and it's under the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. And as the Council recognized that proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and their means of delivery posed a threat to the international peace and security. The context of the resolution was what happened in the US in 9/11, and the threat of terrorism, including known efforts to acquire weapons of mass destruction and illicit proliferation networks. The resolution is a binding instrument addressing the threat posed by non-state actors, particularly for terrorist purposes, of acquiring WMDs, their means of delivery, or their related materials. This resolution complements relevant multilateral treaties since it fills gaps in the international non-proliferation legal framework, namely, as I said, by covering non-state actors, means of delivery, and controls beyond requirements under the key non-proliferation instruments such as the Biological and Chemical Weapons Convention and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The committee and its group of experts take a cooperative approach, not a punitive one, and that's why this is not a sanctioned resolution. The resolution 1540 was reaffirmed by subsequent ones, and the 2325 was adopted by the Security Council in 2016 after a comprehensive review. The resolution 1977 from 2011 extended the mandate of the committee for a period of 10 years until 25 April 2021. But before the mandate ends, there should be a comprehensive review that could not happen because of the pandemic. So the Security Council issued the resolution 2572, which is a rollover one that extends the mandate of the 1540 committee until 28 February 2022. The resolution contains 3 definitions. I personally wish it would be clearer regarding other concepts too, but at least it defines what means of delivery are, what are related materials, and the concept of non-state actors. So the definition of means of delivery includes missiles, rockets, and other unmanned systems capable of delivering nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons that are specially designed for such use. The related materials, according to this resolution, are materials, equipment, and technology covered by relevant multilateral treaties and arrangements, or included on national control lists, which could be used for the design, development, production, or use of WMDs and their means of delivery. And for the resolution, also, non-state actor is an individual or entity not acting under the lawful authority of any state in conducting activity which come within the scope of this resolution. As you can see, for the 1540, non-state actors are not just only terrorists. Could be an exporter, importer, academia, brokers, industry, banks, etc. I want to make emphasis on this because many people tend to think that non-state actors is a synonym of terrorist. And as you can see, the spectrum is much broader. The key obligations that the resolution establishes are determined in 3 first operative paragraphs. In the first one, the Security Council decides that all states shall refrain from providing any form of support to non-state actors that attempt to develop, acquire, manufacture, possess, transfer, or use nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and their means of delivery. In the second operative paragraph, the Security Council also decides that all states shall adopt and enforce appropriate and effective laws that prohibit any non-state actors from undertaking all the actions that I already mentioned, plus acting as an accomplice, assisting or financing all those activities that are already said. And the third operative paragraph refers basically to domestic controls to prevent the proliferation of those weapons. Like, for example, controls over related materials and accounting and securing, and I'm going to talk about a little bit later about this. So we could summarize what is expressed in the first operative paragraphs by saying that states basically comply with the obligation expressed in the first operative paragraph, showing their political commitment by signing, ratifying, and implementing the treaties which constitute the pillars of the resolution, which are the NPT, the CWC, and the BWC. Also, 8 conventions out of the 19 related to counterterrorism are also included in this political commitment. All those treaties, in a way or another, establish prohibitions on the signatory states not to develop, acquire, and so on. WMDs and related materials. States comply with the second operative paragraph by having legislation that prohibit and punish all the actions I've already mentioned, plus acting as an accomplice, assisting, or financing. And the third operative paragraph, states comply with that, having domestic controls that include effective measures and legislations on WMDs related materials. And this is the operative paragraph that I'm going to speak, to talk about it a little bit deeper. So the operative paragraph 3 is composed by 4 subparagraphs, A, B, C, and D. Here, the Security Council, as I said, decides that all states shall take and enforce effective measures. I mean, states decide how effective are those measures to establish domestic controls to prevent the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and their means of delivery, including by establishing appropriate controls over related materials, and to this end shall develop and maintain appropriate effective measures to account for and secure such items in production, use, storage, and transport. Also, they are supposed to develop and maintain appropriate effective physical protection measures. This is specifically the point which is linked with the topic of this panel. The Resolution 1540 and the subsequent ones are the only legally binding instrument that establish obligations, in this case on nuclear security. Because we have to keep in mind, as you know, that IAEA issued guidelines on nuclear security, or even, for example, OPCW launched last week guidelines referred to chemical safety and security. But these are guidelines, and the 1540 is mandatory. As you can see in these slides, there is also a reference to personal reliability at the bottom of the slide. Even though this does not constitute an obligation for the resolution, I included it because we consider personal reliability when we analyze the state's status of implementation in terms of security measures. This concept is included in the last matrix template approved by the committee, and I wanted to refer to this since it's relevant from the nuclear security point of view. And to finalize with the obligations, the operative paragraph 3, C, and D requires very roughly the following measures. I mean, the states are supposed to have domestic controls with respect to WMDs related materials. In this sense, the states should have border controls, law enforcement efforts to fight illicit trafficking and brokering, national export controls, controls on export, transit, transshipment, re-export, controls on providing funds and services related to export and transshipment, end user controls, and criminal or civil penalties for violation. And this is very, very close connected with what Elena talked about when she referred about the importance of having different kinds of controls in order to assure that the nuclear security is going to be considered as something that is so relevant in terms of the non-proliferation of WMDs, or in this case, nuclear weapons. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the committee. The 1540 committee was established because the paragraph 4 of the resolution 1540 expresses that the Security Council decides to establish for a period of no longer than 2 years a committee consisting of all members of the Council, which will report to the Security Council for its examination on the implementation of the resolution. But those initial years were prolonged by successive resolutions. Now the committee's chair is the Ambassador Juan Ramón de la Fuente from Mexico, and Mexico will chair the committee during next year as well. As I said before, the committee has a cooperative and transparent approach to facilitate the implementation of the resolution. I also said that this resolution does not sanction any state nor persons or entities. In terms of working methodology, the committee holds regular meetings, and its annual work is established by an annual program of work, which is usually prepared by the United Kingdom and later approved by the committee. As a result of the annual work, we produce annual reviews because the committee is mandated to do so by the operative paragraph 9 of the resolution 1977. These annual reviews, which includes the compilation and general examination of information on the status of the state's implementation of the Resolution 1540, as well as the state's effort at outreach, dialogue, assistance, and cooperation. The annual review is prepared by the group of experts and revised by the committee by the end of each December. The comprehensive reviews are very important events that occur in accordance with what is stated in the Operative 3 of the Resolution 1977. This operative paragraph expresses that the 1540 Committee will conduct comprehensive reviews every 5 years and prior to the renewal of its mandate, including, if necessary, recommendations on adjustments to the mandate. This also includes a meeting to the Security Council a report on the conclusions of those reviews. In terms of how the committee organizes its work, it does it through 4 working groups. If you visit the 1540 website, you will see that there are 4 tabs which are with these same colors corresponding to implementation, assistance, cooperation, and transparency and outreach working groups. Every of these groups has a coordinator in the committee and in the group of experts. For example, I coordinate the group on cooperation within the group of experts. The first group deals with all aspects related to the implementation of the resolution by states. The second on the assistance mechanism. The third with cooperation between the committee and international, regional, and sub-regional organizations. And the last one is on outreach. And among other tasks, it keeps the website updated. The committee developed some tools to enhance the implementation of the resolution. The first one is the national reports. For us, this is the most important source of information that states provides to the committee on a voluntary basis regarding national implementation. We also use matrices to compile all the information regarding states' national implementation. Matrices constitute a very useful tool for us because they resume how states implement the resolution. We don't assess states through their matrices. They are just a way to organize information, and they help us to assist states when they require our assistance. I'm going to talk about matrices when I refer to the comprehensive review. And the National Implementation Action Plans, or NAPs, as we call them, is another tool that we encourage states to develop, since they help them to organize priorities in timelines and also visualize gaps they have in terms of the resolution implementation. Dialogue with states is something that we always put in practice because, as I already said, the committee has a cooperative approach with states. Lessons learned constitute another tool that we encourage states and international and regional organizations to share through our website with the purpose of being used by states. The Resolution 1540, in its operative paragraph 7, recognizes that some states may require assistance in implementing the provisions of the resolution within their territories, and invites states in a position to do so to offer assistance. In this regard, the committee facilitates assistance by matching requests with offers of assistance from states and international and regional organizations, and that's what we call clearinghouse role. You can find the list of states requesting assistance as well as donors in the committee's website. The group of experts can provide further information or declaration via email, or you need to call us just to keep in touch with us. At the end of my presentation, I'll provide you the contact details. Regarding the comprehensive review, in August 2020, seeing that the committee would not be able to follow the program of work because of the pandemic, the chair of the 1540 committee informed the Security Council that the comprehensive review should be postponed until 2021. The activities that will be part of the agenda are still being discussed among the members of the committee. What we accomplished in terms of the objectives of that modality paper which details the activities of for the comprehensive review, was the analysis of the 193 matrices. This analysis has been prepared on the basis of the data contained in the committee matrices updated during 2019 and 2020 in respect of all UN member states. Each matrix contained 228 measures for each state. Once they were ready, they were sent to the states for comments. 56 states sent substantive remarks, and after having virtual meetings with them, we agreed on the versions that were published on the committee's website on 9 December 2020. Only 3 states did not agree with the committee on the content of their matrices, and that's why those matrices could not be updated. The result we got after that analysis was the following. In terms of overall level of implementation, we could appreciate that there was a 6% of increase in the implemented measures percentage if we compare it to the results obtained after the comprehensive review in 2016. If we consider the level of implementation, but among the different regions, Africa showed the lowest level of implementation, followed by the GRULAC region. The GRULAC region. As you can see, Eastern Europe and the WEOC have the highest percentages of measures in place. Now is the turn to see what happened to the measures related to OP3A and B, where nuclear security measures are included. There we can appreciate a decrease, here, a decrease in the GRULAC region, and you must be wondering why. Well, there are a couple of reasons for this to occur. First of all, you have to keep in mind that these percentages refer to measures related to the implementation of accounting for and securing WMDs related materials as a whole, what means nuclear, chemical, and biological ones. The decrease in recorded measures in respect to chemical and biological weapons related materials since 2016 should be considered against the background of changes to the matrix template, which was corrected in 2017, and the ongoing work in other international bodies such as IAEA, the OPCW, and the BWC, which has enhanced the understanding of member states and the committee of the requirements under the operative paragraph 3A and B. The updated matrix data reflect this developing understanding of the significance in a 1540 context of security versus safety measures. For example, some measures identified in safety laws and regulations may include accounting activities such as registration, licensing, record keeping, and reporting. These were therefore generally included under the accounting fields in the committee matrices. Measures identified in safety laws and regulations were not included in the fields related to security and physical protection unless they cover security measures to prevent material from being stolen, getting lost, or otherwise falling out of regulatory control for being diverted for weapons purposes. As a consequence, since those concepts are now more robust, we were able to make a stricter analysis, and that's why the percentage of implementation in 2021 is a little bit lower than the percentages observed in 2016, especially for the GRULAC region. Now, looking at the percentage of implemented measures related to OP3A and B in the GRULAC region for nuclear weapons. We can see that all states have at least one measure in place to account for during production, use, and storage, okay? But almost half of them have enforcement measures in place. The green bars are legislation in place or measures in place, and the orange bars are related to enforcement of those measures. When we talk about measures to account for transport, these ones, for transport, the percentage of accounting measures significantly drop to 61% and 55 measures related to enforcement. And the situation is even worse in terms of security measures regarding production, use, storage, and transport, okay? It was also difficult to find measures in place on physical protection measures, and even more difficult to find measures related to personal reliability among the analyzed states that belong to the Gulag region. To quickly recap, I would like you to revise some key points. Firstly, it's important to keep in mind that Resolution 1540 establishes legally binding obligations on all UN member states, and that it focuses on non-state actors, weapons of mass destruction, and means of delivery. Also, as states implement the obligations under the relevant international instruments, they should also take into account the obligations of Resolution 1540 in order to ensure that they are all effectively fulfilled. And finally, regarding the results we obtained after analyzing the matrices, we can say that there was a slight increase in the overall Resolution 1540 implementation measures compared to 2016, and the Gulag region still needs to fill gaps in terms of nuclear security. I appreciate your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. Here you have the contact details, and please contact us in case you have questions or whichever doubt that you would have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Edith, for a very comprehensive, very interesting talk. And same to Irma and Elena. We've heard three talks that are in a broader category, address very similar issues, but are also vastly different. So we have, the issue of nuclear security. We have the issue of nuclear terrorism, and obviously 1540. And so I now encourage participants to ask any questions, discussions, and of course encourage also our three panelists to make some comments on each other's very interesting and important talks for issues that we are dealing with today. So floor is open. I noticed that there was already some in the chat a question that was addressed, so thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Yes, Alfredo. Alfredo, you're muted.
Hi, sorry, yes, I have some troubles with my computer. Thanks so much to the three panelists. It was very interesting, your presentations. And I have a question for Edith regarding the 1540 committee. My question is, what happens if a state fails to comply with their obligations? Has the Security Council adopted any sanctions against a state for not complying with these obligations?
No, not at all, because as I said before, the committee has a cooperative approach with states. It's not a punitive, it has not a punitive approach. So it does not sanction any state in case we consider that it's not complying with the resolution. And what we do is to try to approach the states and do some outreach about what are the benefits of complying with the resolution. And we try to do our best to encourage them to fulfill the obligations of the resolution, but the committee hasn't done that at all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see none at the stage. Would Irma or Elena or Edith, would you like to maybe make a few additional comments until people, maybe some folks think about questions?
I have a question for Edith.
Okay.
About the gaps to close in Latin America or GRULAC in general. Which are the actions that the committee is taking to try to close those gaps?
Good. Yeah. Well, actually, we are closely working with the regional organization, specifically OAS, and OAS is having now different type of grants from other organizations or states. And we are trying to outreach about to reach out all the states that we consider that have the lowest level of implementation. We encourage them to do this. We organized activities also, as I said, with the different tools that the committee has, like, for example, national action plans, also peer reviews, these kind of things that encourage states to increase the level of implementation. As I said before, we have a cooperative approach, but the resolution has a problem, a basic problem. It says to the states what to do, but not how to do it. So we try to reach out states, explaining them in kind of a way they understand what they are supposed to do, but with certain limits because of their sovereignty, because they implement the measures in the way that they think it's more appropriate. And that's why we have to respect that. And this is what we are doing in Latin America, basically. And also we are working very closely with OnlyRec. And, but we know that there are so many gaps that still needs to be filled, but we are in the good track. So I hope that the level of implementation will improve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question to both Irma and Elena, and that relates to the CPPN or the amended CPPNW treaty and the review conference next year. And from your perspective, what can the region do to prepare the LAC region to prepare for that conference, in particular in the context of I think Article 12 about reporting on what states are doing to implement the amended treaty, because this will clearly be a major issue at the review conference next year.
I think that the main purpose is of the review conference is to review the adequacy of the amended CPPNM in terms of the reality, the context, the global context at that moment. I think that in such terms, as the amended CPPNM has been very well written, there is no much to review. But the review conference could be an excellent forum of exchange among states about how to rightly implement the treaty. And also, it is planned that those states that are not still parts of the amended convention would be invited to participate. And we see it, I don't know if Elena can agree with me, that it would be a very good environment to facilitate the adherence of the many countries that are not still parts of the convention.
Thank you. I mean, I misspoke. It's Article 14. I just looked at my notes. So, in particular, the article that asked for steps taken to implement the convention. Elena, you have any comment?
Yeah, I just would briefly add that this is yet another instrument that works in the same direction as the UN Security Council Resolution 1540. And that reporting that is reflected in Article 14 that the states should do. So for the GRUAC region, I would say two things: for member states to work on their reports and present them in advance to the conference. And second, those who have not yet adhered to the amended convention to do so. This is a good time to request various assistance, either from the IAEA or working with some of the countries through the Global Partnership on WMD and some other instruments to help to actually put in place all the necessary internal domestic legislation and measures to implement it. So that's a really good period to do it. There are some good things come with COVID because it kind of pushed the timeline for the convention. Our center, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, conducted a survey of countries who have implemented, and what we find is that it's usually either a lack of kind of champion within the government, and then it takes forever for this amendment to be ratified, or there is lack of resources. And in the latter case, it's relatively easy to find ways to secure some assistance from international organizations or various bodies. So there's so many opportunities and offered in this area. It's nowadays really a shame not to use them and to implement and adhere to the convention. So we still have time, and I encourage those of you who are representing these countries. I unfortunately don't have a list with me. Maybe all of you are already members of the amended CPPNM, but I would doubt that there is still a number of countries that are not there yet. Okay.
Thanks, Irma, go ahead.
Just one more comment. We shouldn't forget that one GRUAC state allowed the entry into force of the amended convention, that was the ratification of Uruguay. So in 2016, we are also active on that. With the NTI Global Dialogue, we organized 3 months ago a meeting for Latin American diplomats about how to dynamize in their countries an active participation to into the RevCom, the ACPPNM RevCom. If you want, I can provide some materials about our presentations to open another way to think it over, how to be active for GRUAC countries in the CPPNM RevCom.
Thanks, Irma. I mean, let me conclude, but I want to make this comment, and following on both your and Elena's comment. By the way, I mean, Honduras was also the country that pushed the TPNW in force. So the region is really taking a lead in this field, and which is great. You know, speaking as someone who once worked for a relatively small ministry, a division within a ministry dealing with the whole spectrum of non-proliferation, disarmament, arms control, and nuclear security, etc. I encourage our colleagues, some of them are sort of kind of at the beginning of their careers in this field, to make use of opportunities like this. So, you know, you are aware that your country, you know, your country may not be a party yet to the amended treaty. Well, you know, here's an opportunity to take that and push that, because you didn't take ownership of that issue. Secondly, there's a reporting function, both in terms of the amended treaty, but also Security Council Resolution 1540. Most countries have already submitted the reports for 1540, as Edith pointed out. You know, maybe on the amended convention, that is still lacking. Again, an opportunity for you to maybe be the one who say, well, you know, I'll look into this. As Elena mentioned, there are, and Edith, there are plenty of opportunities, the IEA, the 1540 committee, to reach out, to provide training, to provide assistance. But for you as an official, you can really take ownership of this, and that's a way to establish your career in the area. So I really encourage you to go back to your ministries and kind of look into these opportunities and see how you can not only carve up a sort of a niche out for yourself, but obviously to promote your own country's involvement and support of these very important international instruments.